The first third of the book, or at least the first part of a three-point outline, is genuine Christianity tried by fire. What does it mean to live genuinely as a Christian, true Christianity, when bad stuff is happening in your life? James covers that. Today, we're going to look at the fiery trial of hardship, bad stuff that's happening in our life. James chapter 1, 2 through 4, we're going to look at the purpose of trials. Why are there trials? Well, to bring joy through growth. Secondly, to help build endurance. And number 3, Christian maturity. We're going to look at the power of faith, verses 5 through 8. The power of prayer in asking God for wisdom to understand, and I think even more to understand, but to help you get through some of these things. And we're going to look at the stabilizing power that comes from complete trust in God, that He's going to take care of things. And then we're going to look at the passing nature of wealth. Because let's face it, there are probably no trials that we would face that is not some way linked to our finances. I mean, if you think about it, even if you're sick and you have to spend 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks in the hospital, there's a financial cost to all that, right? And so we get to thinking in our mind. I had a good friend of mine that told me this: if I could only have $500 more per month, everything would be okay. You know what I'm saying? If I could only have $500 more per month. And we were kind of partners in a little business venture, and thanks to the little business venture, we were able to provide that $500 per month. But we have a way of thinking that about our finances. If only, if only, if only. And James says, you need to wait a second. Those of you who are really putting your trust in wealth, whether it's a little bit more per month or if everything is going well for you now, he says, just wait. Because you're going to see that riches are fleeting. They're going to disappear. And you know yourself that situation. No sooner than you get that new raise and you bring it home, or the bonus or whatever it is, that the car is going to break down. You need to replace the washing machine. The refrigerator goes out. You know what I'm saying? That's just the way things happen in life. All right, the little notes section next to the text. Now, the text, as I mentioned, is the New English Translation. I think it's an adequate translation of the Bible. It's an open source. You can find that. Let's see. I believe on the acknowledgments page of your book, I have a link that you can go online and you can see that. I believe it's the netbible.org or something similar to that. But you can go and you can look at that if you want to read more of it. But I have it printed in here. And the main reason I'm using the Net Bible is because they allow me to do that. Most versions of the Bible do not allow you to print as much as I have printed in the book. The little notes section next to it. Now, those are for your notes. You can put whatever you want down if you want to. You can say, Joey wore a lime green shirt during class. If you want to put that down, that may be important. But what I'm going to do is that as we go through the text, I'm going to highlight some words. And if you want to write the definition of those words down or anything, that's what I put the note section there for, is so that you can... I just have a note here that Mark Garlock is texting from home that there's no sound. So And he may be referring to the beginning. I don't think the mic was turned on in the beginning. So maybe we have that now. Okay, very good. Isn't it great that you can have instant feedback like that? I think it's wonderful. And Mark, we want to thank you and your wife for sharing. I never know which camera to look at. We want to thank you for sharing our class today, as well as all of those who are streaming our class online. We appreciate it. Okay, since I am the one that has the microphone, normally I prefer to let the class read in this case, but since I have the microphone, I'll read the text for us, and I'm going to read 2 through 11. Yes, sir. He's got it. Thank you. You see? Isn't that great? Verse 2, beginning. My brothers and sisters, consider it nothing but joy when you fall into all sorts of trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect effect, so that you will be perfect and complete, not deficient in anything. But if anyone is deficient in wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and without reprimand, and it will be given him. But he must ask in faith without doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed around by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord, since he is a double-minded individual, unstable in all his ways. Now the believer of humble means, by the way, Pacific Northwest, do you say humble or do you say humble? Hard H. Yeah, we're not very humble, right? Okay. Just wondered. I ask that wherever I go. Verse 9, now the believer of humble means should take pride in his high position, but the rich person's pride should be in his humiliation, because he will pass away like a wildflower in the meadow. For the sun rises with its heat and dries up the meadow. The petal of the flower falls off, and its beauty is lost forever. So the rich person in the midst of his pursuits will wither away. All right, let's look at verse 2. My brothers and sisters, look at that word consider. Consider. Consider is a thinking word, isn't it? Consider the facts. You need to think about it. So what James is saying, if you want to have joy in the midst of trials, what are you going to have to do? It's a mental process, isn't it? And because it is a mental process, does it come naturally? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Usually with me, it's poor, pitiful me. I can't believe that God has allowed this thing to happen to me. So I have to do a little legwork or a little brain work, perhaps I'd say. Consider. Consider it nothing but joy when you fall into all sorts of trials. Trials is the word. It's from the Greek word perismos. You don't have to worry about that. There are two main translations of the word. One is trial, like bad stuff. You get sick. Your car breaks down. As a Christian, you're persecuted. Somebody takes advantage of you. My daughter, when she was visiting with us up here, she was trying to get a matter taken care of. Someone had stolen her identity and had charged $1,500, actually made $1,500 worth of cash withdrawals. How that happened on a credit card, I don't know. And she wasn't getting any kind of relief from that. In fact, the bank didn't help her. The police couldn't help her. Finally, she was able to appeal to her homeowner's insurance, and she was able to get some of it back. Majority of it, actually, 2/3. But that would fall under trials, wouldn't it? People taking advantage of you, bad things happening. And actually, in the Bible, the word is translated both ways, either as trials or temptations. So it can refer to temptation to sin. Here in this context, though, he's not talking necessarily about temptation to sin, except in the secondary sense that when trials come, you are tempted to sin, are you not? So it can, regular trials can be a temptation, if you think about that. But here he's talking about bad stuff that happens to you, and with the word trial, I mean, even look at the word in English, trial. What does that suggest? Okay, hardship. And the idea is you're being tested somehow. You know, that's kind of what comes out of the idea of trial, is that you are being tested somehow. So even our English word is preserving kind of what the Scripture is saying here. All right, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. I'll talk about the word endurance here for a minute. Endurance means steadfastness, fortitude, or persistent waiting. Some versions translate it patience, perseverance. It's the ability to keep on keeping on in spite of what's going on. And that's one of the benefits of trials, James is saying. One of the reasons we can consider it joy is because we can keep on keeping on. Yes, ma'am.
Holding fast to the truth of who Jesus is. You know, it's keep on believing.
Yes.
Keep on believing that He is Lord.
Yes.
And He will walk you through these waters.
Colleen said that the whole purpose of keep on keeping on is that you're putting your trust in God, you're keeping your eyes on Jesus, and because of His work in your life and because of your faith in Him, you're actually able to make it through. That's what you're saying. All right, very good. Thank you. I think that's a wonderful description. Yes, sir.
To culminate.
Yes.
Stand under.
Yes. Yeah, just stand under. There you go.
And it's to be able to, and I have been there before. Back in, I guess we all have, one way or the other, I should say. But to introduce an illustration from my life is we were unemployed, or I should say underemployed, because I was working 7 jobs. We were underemployed for about 2.5 years. Spanning the period of 2006 to 2009, about 2.5 years during that time. We were looking for a church, and nothing was really happening. And it was a very difficult experience for me, and I think in one sense because as a man, we often, and I'm not saying women aren't this way too, but I can tell you specifically as a man, I tie what I do to my self-worth. So when I am not doing something productive, like providing for the family or whatever, I feel like I'm no good. So it was a very difficult time for me personally. Tina was a lot better about it than I was going through that whole circumstance. I think her faith was probably stronger than mine during that circumstance. But I concluded, I went through the whole thing of blaming God and asking God and being angry with God and all of those things, went through all of those. And I finally concluded that if I could get to the end of this with my faith intact, not stronger, but if I could get with my faith intact, this will be successful for me. And my faith was intact, and certainly because of the process, not necessarily during the process, But because of the process, my faith became stronger. But sometimes that's what being able to stand under something, just to endure it. Those of you who are runners know what it means to run until you hit the wall, where you feel like you just can't go anymore. Whenever I reach that point, it's been a while since I ran, but whenever I reach that point, what I would try to do is say, if I could just make it to the next mailbox. You know what I'm saying? If I could just make it to the beginning of the next block. If I could just make it till next Tuesday, I'll be fine. I can do this. I can do it for just a little more. That's a great way of putting it, Vic. And let endurance have its perfect effect. Look at the word perfect. The word perfect there means complete or perfecting. We are not going to be perfect in this life, but we can become mature. This is a little bit of my understanding of what life is about. We are waiting for the coming of Jesus. And he's going to use this word again, patient endurance and all, as he's talking later in the book. But we're waiting for the coming of Jesus. In the process of time, we are preparing for the coming of Jesus. Now, I believe in the new heaven and earth, we are going to have responsibilities. I believe the Bible teaches that our works follow, that our reward is tied to what we do here, and we are preparing for that day, what we will do when Jesus comes again. So, my life is to be spent becoming mature, perfecting what is amiss in my life. So, James says we can rejoice in trials because it's going to lead to endurance, and endurance is going to help produce that perfecting work in us so that we can be ready for the coming of Jesus. So we can be what Jesus wants us to be. So that's the reason he uses the word consider, which, as I mentioned, is a thinking word. Consider. I have to think to the end to be able to come up with my perspective. Because if I'm just thinking about having enough money to make it through the week, if I'm just thinking about how long is this sickness going to be, and am I going to be able to survive this, if I'm just thinking in those terms, it's going to be very difficult because those are very short-term goals. I have to think, and by the word, it's the word teleos, which has to do with the end. Go ahead.
For the joy set before him, endured the cross.
For the
joy set before him, endured the cross. Very good point there. So perfecting has to do that. That you may be perfect, perfecting effect, that you may perfect and complete. The word there is whole. As a matter of fact, the word in the Greek is holokleptos, kleros, I'm sorry. I can't read my writing here. And it has to do with completion. It has to do with integrity. It has to do with something being whole. We might even use the word sound or healthy in describing what it means to be whole. If anyone is deficient in wisdom, I think the King James Version says if anyone lacks wisdom, it simply means to be left behind, to fall short, or as this version is translated, to be deficient in wisdom. And wisdom is there, that's just the word Sophia. We use it in the English language, sophisticated. Someone who is sophisticated, by definition, is someone who is wise. If you think about it, we don't necessarily use it that way, but that's the origin of the word. But he must, and he should ask God who gives to all generously and without reprimand, and it will be given him. I have a sermon. I actually ran across it this morning as I was looking at some notes. It is entitled, The God Who Gives. The God Who Gives. Here is why we can trust in this process, that God is going to get us through our trials, that God will give us wisdom to understand and to make it through. It's because God is a God who gives. He is a good God. Later we're going to read, James tells us that God gives all good gifts. Is it good? Well, then it's from God. Give Him credit for it, because He is the God who gives. So if you are deficient in wisdom, if you need wisdom to understand, and which of us aren't deficient in wisdom, then you need to ask God, and He will help you understand. But he must ask in faith. This is verse 6, nothing doubting. This word doubting there, diakrino, the word actually means to judge or to distinguish between. In the middle, what would that be? In the middle, it means doubting, as it is translated here. But have you ever let your thinking get in the way of your faith? You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm not saying faith is opposed to thinking. But let's say it's 2 o'clock in the morning, you're lying in bed, you're worried about what's going to happen, but you've put your trust in God, but then you get to thinking. You know what I'm saying? Well, is God really going to do this? Does God really care about me? Is God really going to bring me through this? So the idea of doubting, he says, when you ask, he says you need to ask in faith without doubting. He says, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed around by the wind. Because you hear something that may be detrimental to your faith, or you may experience something that is at least on the surface contrary to what you believe God is doing, and then you begin to think and you begin to doubt and all of that. He says what happens is you become very unstable. Have you ever known anybody like that? I knew this fella in college who was like that. You see him one day, he's up. You see him the next day, he's down. You know what I mean? And there may be reasons for that, but there was a real instability in his case, in his mood. But it's easy to be unstable if you doubt. Go ahead.
Became a Christian because I didn't have the knowledge, and I expected everything to be great. And it seemed like all the older, mature Christians, their life was easy because I still had problems that were continuing from my life before. It takes a while, and it was difficult because I wanted things from my own angle, and hadn't learned yet that the best way to help yourself when things are going bad is go out and do something for somebody else. Harold, I was so stuck on myself though that I wanted everything for me.
Harold said at the beginning of his Christian faith, when he was a new Christian, a lot of things, he was unstable. He said because he had the impression that everything was going to be great. I wouldn't have any problems. Everything would be good. And he says it was only in knowing the Word and maturing that he began to see that that's not the case. And by the way, if you ever see the preacher that told you that, you need to slap him. Because he misinformed you. When you become a Christian, oftentimes things will get more difficult, not easier. Now, you'll have more tools to deal with the bad things that happen, but things will get more difficult. Yes. Without reprimand. I like that. Well, you know, many of us have never been in a position where we've had to ask someone for something else. Matter of fact, usually there's a pride issue there. But some of us have had to ask people. During that same period of time, I asked a previous congregation if they would help support me while I was looking for a church. It was very difficult for me to do that. What if I had asked that church that, and they wrote me back a letter that says something like this: Joey, why in the world are you asking us this? Why don't you get out and find you a job? You know, what if they would have written me a letter like that? They would have reprimanded me for asking. And sometimes people begrudge us asking. He says God's not like that. God's not like that. You ask God something, He's not going to throw it back in your face. As a matter of fact, if you ask God for something and 2 years later you go back and you ask Him for something similar, God's not going to say, well, what did you do with what I gave you 2 years ago? You know what I'm saying? We all do that. Oftentimes we throw things back up in people's face when we have given them something. God's not like that. God gives without reprimand. Does that help? Good. A person must not suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. I don't think he necessarily says that you won't receive anything from the Lord, because the power is in God, not in the strength of your faith. And that's vital for us to understand. God is completely able to provide anything we need. And your faith, whether it's a little faith or a lot of faith, is not going to affect what God can do. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Colleen has related experience from her own life in which it was also related to her job, where her faith maybe wasn't what it should be, but God was faithful, and it produced quite a dramatic reversal in the circumstance. So trust God. Trust God is the story. He said, but if you are unstable in all your ways, you know what I'm saying? If there is a sense of instability there, you need to realize that you shouldn't expect that God is going to jump right in there if you don't really believe that He can do it. Sometimes we have made up all these conditions to answered prayer, and we've almost made prayer a mechanical thing. You check off all the right boxes, and then and only then will God answer your prayers. And that's not the case. God knows your needs before you even ask for them. And God is going to answer prayer according to His will. Yes, sir, in the back.
But we also sometimes think God should give us everything we want.
That's right.
Okay, and
I think the whole point of the scripture is saying, look, you know, we don't give our children everything they need or everything they want. We give them what they need to help mature them. That's exactly what I think we're talking about here is God is allowing us to mature by not giving us everything we want all the time.
Very good. Very good.
And again, Steve has made the distinction emphasizing that God has promised to meet our needs, not our wants. Yes, sir, Vic.
In my name.
Yes.
So we have to do it according to God's will, in His design, not ours.
And that's more teaching us about prayer. But the whole idea is the object of our faith, the person that we're asking it for. To ask in Jesus' name means to ask by His authority. And you know, you can ask Uncle Sam, but Uncle Sam may not do it. You can ask your half brother, but your half brother is not going to come through. You can ask Mom and Dad, and Mom and Dad may not be able. But God is the object of our faith, and God is the one that can deliver. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you've heard the old expression to pray like it all depends on God and to work like it all depends on you. There's nothing inherently contradictory about that, as long as you recognize that even if it is, if you work to achieve something, it's because God has given you the strength. Remember, even in Deuteronomy, He says, "Don't forget that I, the Lord your God, have brought you into this good land." He says, "Else you will be tempted to say, it is by the power of my own hand and my own strength that I have gained all of these things." And then He goes on to say, "Remember, I'm the one that gives you the power to get wealth, the power to work." So even when we are working for something, it is God who has empowered us, and that is the path through which God is providing. Someone else had their hand up over here. Yes, sir.
Talking about wisdom,
Yes.
and that also means that we can actually carry that on. But the real point is that you're asking for something righteous that will make you a better person for Him.
Yes.
You could read the last part of this and think that if you want a Corvette, you should be able to ask for it and give it to you. That's not what it's talking about.
No, He's not talking about the brand new car, the brand new house, top of the line, whatever. He's talking here about a spiritually wisdom to be able to overcome. So I think that's important to realize too. Thank you, Don, for that. Then let's see. Double-minded means what it says. It means having two minds. And that's what happens when you ask for something but yet you doubt. You're of two minds. And you can't, there is no stability there. And that's what he's saying. There's no stability there when you're of two minds. Verse 9, now the believer of humble means should take pride in his high position, but the rich person's pride should be in his humiliation, because he will pass away like a wildflower in the meadow. Again, another kind of contradiction. Normally, we think of the believer that's in humble, who has humble means, as being someone that should look down upon themselves. But what does he say here? You should take pride in your high position. He doesn't go on to explain that. But he says you can take pride in your high position. What might that high position be?
Child of God.
They are a child of God. In other words, they are pursuing true value and riches in life. Now, being a child of God and being rich is not mutually exclusive. You can be wealthy. You can live a life where you don't have to struggle and still be a child of God. But just because you have humble means doesn't mean that you are an inferior or a bad person. In fact, you can take pride in the fact that you are a child of God. And I think that's probably what he means there. Then he goes on to say, the rich person's pride should be in his or her humiliation. And what do you think that means?
Well, that's probably one reason why Christ came as a baby and lived like us in very humble circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Vic makes a reference to Christ, who came in humbly as a baby, who demoted himself, as Paul said in Philippians, 7 times and became obedient to death, even death on the cross. But the thing about it is, it reminds me of the story of the rich man who died. The richest man in town died. And people were gossiping about it in the streets the next day, and someone says, "I wonder how much he left." And the response was, all of it. All of it. He says, you can rejoice in that. You are a child of God. And all of these other things related to status and possessions, he said, it's not valuable. Tina doesn't like for me to tell St. Peter at the gate stories, but someone comes to St. Peter at the gate. She thinks they're disrespectful, and they may be, but I think they're funny. Someone comes to St. Peter at the gate, and he says, "Peter, I've lived my life as a rich man, and I know the Bible says we can't bring anything with us, but I want to bring something with me." And Peter says, No, you can't bring anything with you. He says, but Peter, I really do. And he finally gets Peter to say, okay, you can bring one suitcase full of anything you want. And so the man brings a suitcase full of gold. And he shows it to Peter at the gate, unzips the suitcase and shows him. And he says, you could have brought anything you wanted, and you brought pavement? Okay, maybe they're not that funny. But the idea is that there is definitely a change of values between this life and the next life. And so he says, if you have been blessed with this world's good, then you need to rejoice in your humiliation. In the fact that even though you may be the richest man or woman in town, even though you may have all the possessions that anyone might need, that it's all going to come to naught. And he's very vivid. He says, for as the sun rises with its heat, dries up the meadow, the petal of its flower falls, and its beauty is lost forever, so the rich person in the midst of his pursuits will wither away. Yes, sir, David.
He's not take pride in riches, but he's take pride if he becomes humble.
Takes pride and then becomes humble.
Very good. Yes, Harold.
Not a respecter of persons.
He is not a respecter of persons, and quite honestly, I mean, there are some people who, by virtue, I suppose, of their intellect and such, they have been able to make a lot of money in life, or they've been able to do a lot. But some of those very guys will
tell you that maybe it had just as much to do with luck than anything else. They were in the right place at the right time. After all, Jeff Bezos and I decided we were going to sell things on the internet at the same time. And of all things, he was selling books. I was selling modems. You know, the actually dial-up modems. I was selling modems on the internet. He succeeded. Well, I was less successful. But you know what I'm saying? He was in the right place at the right time. Could have been. No. Okay, that's another humility. Tina mentioned, to those who much are given, much will be required, and so that's another thing to do with humility. Yeah. Please.
When down and outers get a break, cheer. And when the arrogant rich are brought down to size, cheer. Prosperity is as short-lived as a wildflower.
Yes.
Don't ever count on it.
Don't ever count on it. Very good.
Peterson did a good job with that version. It is a paraphrase, but after all, isn't that what you're getting in class from me? Think about that. So, and some people like Peterson can say it a little better in a shorter space. Yes.
Both of these folks, the lowly brother and the rich in his humiliation, will be like flowers. Both of them will. And in scorching and heat and weather, the grass will flower.
All humans
Are in that category. Yeah, it is what it is. But yes. Yeah, very good. Very good. Uh, our time has expired today. We definitely will be in this lesson again next week. If you did not get a chance to read and do the lesson, that is your assignment this week. Read and do the lesson, and we will try to cover this. I mean, we've covered the main issues, but we'll make some applications next week, and part of your work will be for that purpose as we look at some of those applications. I thought I might have one more thing that I wanted to share, but it apparently is not that important. Maybe it'll come to me before next week. Have a good week. Good day.